Welcome to the Independent Workforce, a podcast where we explore the now and the future of work through the lens of temporary employment, such as freelancers, contractors, fractional experts, you name it. Here we speak with CEOs, recruiters, founders, and industry leaders about how they work with independent talent, the wins, the challenges, and the lessons learned. My name is Yurii. I'm growing the freelance market at FreelancerMap, an international platform that's been connecting top independent professionals with companies for over 20 years. And my guest is Matthew Dowling, the founder of Freelancer Club, a platform that's been educating, elevating, and empowering the next generation of freelancers for over a decade, who also advocates for fair pay and freelancer rights, from launching the NoFreeWork campaign to leading initiatives like Rise Freelancer, with the goal to empower and support 1 million individuals by 2026. So, welcome, Matt.
Hi, great to be here.
It's been forever. I've been following your work in the freelance world for ages, and the craziest thing, but it's our first face-to-face conversation. So I'm here just to ask you everything about freelance and just to get all the pieces of your experience. I know it's close to impossible in the time that we have. Still, let's start with share a little bit with me your background and why did you decide to focus your professional efforts on working with freelancers?
Sure. Well, my background stems from falling out of university and straight into freelancing very accidentally. So it was never in the cards to set up as a freelancer. Rather, I was going down the traditional route of applying for full-time jobs, but wasn't able to land the type of position that I wanted. And in the meantime, I was being asked if I could help out with some photography projects. So it was very much a thing that crept up behind me. And before I knew it, I realized I was earning a little bit of money as a photographer. The job I wanted in traditional employment wasn't materializing. And bit by bit, it just became what I did. It sort of snuck up. And so that was the origin story of becoming a freelancer. However, I had no clue what I was doing. I really stumbled around the dark for the guts of 2 years, and I got away with it most of the time. And then I hit up a company that, for the first year, I had a fantastic relationship with, but in the second year, they didn't pay me for some work that I had done. The following month, there was also some issues with their payment, and this went on for a number of months until I had to break into their head office, not literally, but open the door and see that they had gone bankrupt. And unfortunately, they had decided that they weren't going to pay the freelancers as well as a lot of the overheads that they had, but rather continue to use to sell more of their stock. And subsequently, a big group of us found ourselves in trouble. So we had no contract. That was naivety on our part. And we had no way of getting that money back. So that very much sowed the seed. And a journalist heard about that story, and it ended up making the national press. That was both slightly embarrassing, but also the starting point of, I guess, what would become my life's work, which is ensuring freelancers are more educated, that they're more protected, and hopefully that things that happen to me won't happen to them. So from there, I started to set up companies that would eventually become the Freelancer Club, which is a 10-year-old community platform that hopefully tries to provide freelancers with a lot of the aspects I've mentioned on my journey.
You know, there is a book called Accidental Community Builder, and I feel like it's very similar, like Accidental Freelancer. And I talked to many different experts in the freelance market. And how did you start your journey? Oh, it was just by accident. So it's like, pretty interesting story. And you told that you are advocating for freelancers, so it kind of like came from your inner needs to be seen, to be heard, and like to be protected. And how do you do it currently?
Yeah, that's always been a really central, almost unofficial part of our business. We're a bootstrap company, so we don't have to answer to any investors, which, has pros and cons, but certainly in terms of being able to move away from just purely commercial business ideas, it's given us the freedom and flexibility to do things we're really passionate about. So I guess the first formal initiative was the NoFreeWork campaign. When we launched the business, we decided we would never post unpaid work on the website. And so we started that with a hashtag on Twitter, before Twitter became X and whatever it is today. It was a great community 10 years ago. It was filled with individuals who are very passionate about injustices and righting wrongs. And the hashtag and the campaign went viral. We trended #1 on Twitter more than once. We managed to make the press. We made a big splash. And it was really clear that freelancers were pissed off at this. There was a lot of anger in the community about exploitative unpaid work. And so we knew that we had to do something in this space. That campaign led us to some incredible thought leaders, communities, and individuals who felt the same. And we brought the idea to see if we could request legislation to the UK government to see if we could get freelancers more rights. Now, unfortunately, Brexit came along and a lot of those conversations got pushed back to the end of the line. But over the past few months, as part of both the work that we do here at Freelancer Club, but also the work that I do as a chairman for a working group with some incredible companies, organizations, and individuals, we have been able to get a freelance champion, or certainly the commitment of a freelance champion, as part of the government. And that will be the first time, really, that the word freelance has been used in a job title, but also that freelancers will feel that they have a voice and that they feel they've got a place at the table when it comes to big decisions around legislation and around protections and support for workers in the UK. So it's been an incredible journey, I would say a 10-year plus journey to try and see some material change that has happened, but also the operational work that we do has seen a lot of change across multiple different sectors, not just individuals, but also in the education space. We do a lot of work in education, and we've seen complete attitudinal changes around the way universities view freelancers, the way industry views freelancers. And although we are a very small drop in the ocean, we like to think we played a small part in that change.
What is the difference between educating, let's say, full-time experts and freelancers?
So the training that we provide and the support that we provide is very much tailored to any individual that has entrepreneurial aspirations. So either running a side hustle whilst at university, or they have plans to go full-time freelance after they graduate. So the training and education that they'll receive won't change in terms of their specialism. And so what everybody knows and might expect that one would get at university exists. And we would often exist and complement in an extracurricular capacity. Although we do some in-curriculum support, most of the work we do will help them identify those individuals who aspire to freelance. And then we have a roster of experts. We have the IP, technology, and support mechanisms to be able to help them develop certain skills that we think are essential. So the 3 pillars that we operate under are business essentials, mindset, and core skills. We believe that you can be the top of your class in terms of the thing that you are offering, but if you lack those other components, it can be very difficult to sustain a freelance business or even run a side hustle without having to spend a lot of time dedicated to the non-billable hours. So that's really what we're trying to do. We want to instill the confidence as well as the scaffolding and framework to be able to become a highly successful, in whatever that means to that individual, freelancer, and be able to thrive.
There are many freelancers that I'm talking to who think that, oh, I'm an expert, I'm now a freelancer, I can do whatever I want. And then yes, and you are also a business owner. So on top of your expertise, you have to be a sales expert, you have to be marketing expert, networking expert, you name it. It's just a small part of it. And it's very clear at least for me and for other people, that you need to have those business skills and you need to run a business, not just being like some random individual. But if we are talking about end clients, people who are hiring freelancers, what they have to be educated on to start work with these independent talents?
Well, on our platform, we operate a matchmaking component. So we deal with a very large number of hiring clients and individuals, actually. So not always businesses. It can sometimes be a member of the general public. But we've noticed that there is a big knowledge gap when it comes to really understanding a lot of the key components of both hiring and managing and working with freelance talent. It can start from the moment they post a job, and some of the briefs that we receive are incredibly thin and they lack any nuance, which often makes it nearly impossible for the freelance talent to be able to accurately apply for that job. Budgets are all over the place. In fact, I had an experiment with a group recently where I showed them 3 different job posts. All of them were real. And I asked them to guess what the budget was. And within a room of about 30 or 40 people, the price ranged from 150 to £6,000 for the same job. So that gives you an indication of what we experience and we see on a day-to-day basis. So I think a little bit of understanding as to the value of a project, which of course is highly complex because there's so many variables and components to that, but there is a naivety around pricing for projects. And then I think the hiring process has always and historically been very casual when you compare it to hiring a full-time member of staff. And that lackluster throwaway attitude, for example, we often hear of companies that delegate that work to maybe an administrator or an assistant or a junior of the company. So you might have an intern hiring a freelancer for a very important piece of work. It sets a pretty bad precedent for that experience for both sides. A freelancer isn't going to feel loved if from the get-go they're stuck in a corner and asked to do the work without any help or support. And a company isn't going to get the best results out of that freelancer when there's such a disconnect between that relationship. So we fully appreciate that a hiring company doesn't want to invest or dedicate a huge amount of time to something that might be a short-term project. But equally, we would encourage them to invest the appropriate amount of time and pay a fair fee that is not only going to get them a fantastic piece of work, but someone who they will almost definitely use again in the future, and someone who is going to go out there and evangelize about their company and about this great experience that they had for the brand that they worked for. It's effectively a human advertising board if you can treat that freelancer with respect, professionalism, dignity, and fairness. So that's something that we've been working on a lot. We have a concept called ethical hiring, where we speak about this idea of getting a much more level playing field between freelancers and companies to the benefit of all parties, as well as helping hiring companies integrate internal hiring systems that are very seamless and can work with their existing strategies, but ultimately have a much better and more productive experience on both sides.
Tell me a little more about ethical hiring, like what it includes.
So we really broke down some of these power imbalances that we started to see between freelancers and then the hiring client. And there are, sites that have materialized over the last number of years that are quite faceless. I'm sure you know who they are, but and that's okay. They're quite transactional, and there is a place for that, I suppose, in business. But then there's that attitude or that approach we don't think works very well when it comes to hiring somebody that you may want to use on a more long-term basis, or if you want to integrate that person into your company where they might have to collaborate with other members of your team, either other freelancers or full-time members. So we wanted to talk a bit about company culture and how a freelancer could be treated in the same way as you might treat an employee, just in terms of respect and inclusion. The idea of having them buy into your mission is a really big aspect of getting the best work out of somebody, but also having them feel like they are contributing to the wider project or the thing you want to do. So ethical hiring speaks to a lot of different components: fair payment, prompt payment, which unfortunately is another issue, inclusion and diversity, the idea of really understanding the power of building out your talent pool and your workforce with freelancers not as an add-on, but often as the central driving force to what can be an incredibly powerful and malleable way to run your business. So, I mean, just a couple of quick things on that, if I may. I mean, about 8 or 9 years ago, we had an office in the creative district of London. We had full-time staff, and we thought about this and we decided to shift our business model completely to exclusively use agile talent and get rid of our office. So we very much started practicing what we preached. And that was a game-changing moment for us as a small business. But then over the past few years, more recently, we've started to see the evolution of something called workforce blending, where we have the three pillars of agile work or flexible work, which is a legacy of the pandemic and we're all very used to now. Freelancers at the center of the workforce, and then AI agents and that concept of humans working with AI to be able to develop work. We are seeing the top tech organizations and corporations start to envelop workforce blending as the leading methodology to run their business and move their business forward. And this is going to start to trickle down into smaller companies, and we're already seeing that. And this current landscape of AI, I think, is even more showing us how freelancers are becoming essential as a driving force to that workforce.
This episode of The Independent Workforce is brought to you by FreelancerMap, the home of freelancing. Whether you are looking to hire top freelance talent fast or a freelancer ready to find your next big project, FreelancerMap connects the right people with the right work. No endless job boards, no guesswork, just direct access to verified experts and opportunities across the globe. Visit freelancermap.com and start building your next success story today. I love how you phrase it, like blending workforce, and it's something that I also heard from John Younger, Matt Mottola, Mina Bastavros, and I feel like that if you really want to be on the edge, of course, you cannot not have full-time employees. You will have them always. They will be a huge part of your team. Still, you cannot work without AI because it's like the future. If you're not using AI, you are definitely missing out. How on earth people are forgetting about freelancers, those experts who have a ton of experience, who are working with different companies, who are bringing new blood and speed to your company? I still have no idea. And also to your point of ethical hiring, I believe that, okay, so if we are onboarding a full-time expert, and it usually takes, I don't know, a few months so they can read all the documents. Hopefully they can talk to other team members. They can catch up at some meetings. And maybe 3 months later, they're ready to fully start to work on a project. But in freelancing, it doesn't work that way. Sometimes in 3 months' time, you already finishing the project you were hired for. So I'm curious from your experience, how to make this, let's say, ethical onboarding rather fast, that you don't spend a lot of months on just making people to feel valued, but also that you make it in a way that people are feeling valued instead of just being this person who you say goodbye to in like 1-2 months.
Well, I think it probably starts by challenging some assumptions and maybe some existing biases that have existed for a long time. And each country will have its own governments, and there will be barriers and blockages that I'm sure a lot of companies will take a look at and say, well, it's just not worth it, or we don't have that system already integrated, and so it would take a huge amount of work. I mean, it rarely is a complete overhaul. In terms of the practicals of how one would do it, it's very much a case-by-case basis. So I wouldn't want to try and give a template that fits all, because it just doesn't happen. But certainly the common denominator that we've seen with the companies we've worked with is that they're always all surprised at how seamless and quick it can be to try and introduce this additional element to something that they're already running. It's not an overhaul of an existing system. It's just an addition, or sometimes a tweak to an addition to an existing system. In terms of the actual onboarding process, there is a skill to develop when it comes to hiring anybody. We know that. And freelancers are often no different. It's a process where you will have certain boxes that you want to tick in terms of what you're looking for. And then you'll probably have an onboarding process that's already in place that can be adapted to sufficiently support that freelance workforce that you want to bring in. So what we've noticed in the past is that is completely bypassed when hiring a freelancer. I think some organizations maybe don't trust certain platforms or have not tried platforms. And so there's still that barrier to overcome. There's a confidence piece. I think those who have found great resources online and talent funnels to be able to bring in the agile freelancers to get things done are zooming ahead because they've got a very seamless methodology and strategy to be able to bring that type of talent into play without any friction. And I think really it's not rocket science. Once you start to invest time and make the decision that you want to overcome some of these barriers and integrate systems that are going to do the job for you. So it's as much mindset as it is practical tweaks.
When you talk to companies, when you explain them, like what is the best way to hire a freelancer, what is the best way to prepare a job description, a project description, and like how to onboard them, etc., what are the biggest concerns they raise? What they do not believe?
So again, it might be country by country. So just to give you an example, in the UK, we have something called IR35, which is a whole nother podcast to discuss, but that I think has created a bit of scaremongering, and it's put some fear into companies to think there's a huge amount of paperwork. We're not sure how to tackle that, and we don't think it's worth it, so we're just going to ignore it. So the first thing I think we hear from companies is that there are administrative and legislative issues that are blocking the way to bring in freelance talent, or that it's messy, that they'll have to involve other departments that, again, they think it's too much work and we don't want to do that. So we would try and identify what the realities are and actually dispel some of the myths that they might have, and try and tackle that first piece. I think that the second element can often be around freelancers just not investing in the company and how that they can come in and leave whenever they want. And I mean, technically that's true, but isn't that technically the case for a full-time employee? They'll have a contract in place, they can walk if they want. So I think there's probably some misconceptions that freelancers are just dipping in and out without any care. We're having to train both sides here, because when you get it right, when a freelancer really buys into the mission of a company, loves what that company does, they may also have 2 or 3 other clients at the same time. But that does not necessarily mean that their dedication to that project and that company wavers in any way. You know, we've been using and hiring freelancers for a decade for our company. And anecdotally, it's very clear the ones who I need to or would like for them to buy into the mission of the company, you know, and they talk about us in glowing aspects. But let's be clear. There are certain projects and certain freelancers that do not do that, and nor do I need them to do that. And they do a fantastic job. It's quite transactional, it's very practical, and they can choose to dip into the non-work related components of working for a client if they want. So just to give you some practical examples, our main communication channel is Slack. And within Slack, we would have channels that are dedicated to non-business conversation. So we have one called the water cooler channel. And the only rule is you're not allowed to talk about business in that channel. And rather it's a place for freelancers to have a virtual water cooler that they don't have because they don't work in an office full time, to be able to chat about banana bread recipes or the type of dog that they have, you know. So we want to try and build a community and connections amongst all the members of the team to try and smooth out what that looks like, build empathy, build ties between those individuals. And we find that that helps with teamwork, it helps with collaboration. and it helps with longevity. It also reduces turnover and churn. So all of these micro adjustments can have really significant knock-on positive.
Coming back to being inspired, I believe it's like human nature. If you are inspired by something, you will do the best that you can. And if you are treated like shit, most likely you won't be very motivated to do whatever they want from you. And I feel like it's exactly the thing that some companies are missing out on, that then where they work with freelancers, with independent talent, they think that it's like very short-term engagement, 1 month or 2 months they will be out. Why should we spend our time on it? And it's like counter-human. It's like very, very weird. And I feel like it's something that people have to switch on themselves, because you never know what will happen next. At some point, this person may continue working with you like for 2 years afterwards, or maybe this person will refer you some another amazing freelancer, because freelancers usually have networks of freelancers. And if you like are being good to one person, you are being good to dozens and hundreds of other experts. It's like, just joining the, let's say, closed private freelance community by doing this. And we were talking about the companies, but from the freelancer side, what are some common frustrations they face that when they work with companies?
Well, I think you touched on a couple. I think a lot of freelancers feel very isolated when they go in and work for companies, that they're not seen, they don't feel heard. The kind of stereotypical image is, if you want to know who the freelancer is in the company, just look into the corner. They're the one on their own with the computer, not looking at anybody. So I think that would be a frustration. But there are also parts of our community and freelancers who actually want nothing to do with companies, and they much prefer that transactional feeling of popping in, doing the work, and going out. And that's why they became freelancers. But it's probably worth asking that question to get to know what each individual's working style is, or what the preference looks like. I think other aspects that are frustrating to freelancers is that idea of not being able to see the fruits of their labor. So often you're a cog in a much bigger machine, and the work that you do might not have any impact at all, but maybe not for a number of months. You may never see that. So to be kept in that loop, or to start to feel like your work has had some sort of impact, or even from a selfish point of view, they might want that work to put into to their portfolio and show to the next client and start to build on that. But freelancers also require job satisfaction like the rest of us. And I think a little added context as to why they're being brought in can go a long way. So freelancers who are speaking with companies and just get told that specific brief and project, but not the wider context as to where it's going to be used, or why it's going to be valuable to that company, can feel quite frustrating. So there's a few different elements in terms of that early stage process. Then while they're in there, not getting invited to any social aspects, or feeling a little bit isolated or ostracized, again, is a preference. But if you ask, they might want to be included. That can always be a very easy win. And then there are the elements and frustrations around getting paid on time, and scope creep, and getting asked to do more work than was agreed in the contract, and all of the usual things that I'm sure come up on a day-to-day basis for you with your work. But certainly from our freelance community, yeah, all of those fairly well-known bugbears still exist.
It's so weird for me to hear sometimes. For example, if company is like paying their employees every month, let's say on the 24th, and then they pay freelancers in like within 30 days, and I'm like, what the point? Like, you've got the job done, you've got it fast and great, and then you are paying to a person like months later. Go and try to pay your full-time employees a month later and see what will happen. And for some reason, they're like, nah, I don't know. Like, why should we care? So we were talking a lot about like expectations from both sides, from company side, from freelancer side. What, where do you personally see the biggest misalignments between companies' expectations and freelancer realities, and vice versa?
Well, I think it comes down to this piece around communication, identifying a lot of the things we've spoken about already, and having that conversation, figuring out preferences, even to the point of payment. Just to loop back to that quickly, I empathize with larger companies because it's quite a sophisticated process and it's not simple. But I would argue if you are utilizing freelancers on a regular basis to, again, integrate something that is going to work for both sides, because you're right, there is an expectation that, we'll pay a freelancer whenever. We've heard of stories of freelancers not getting paid for 90 plus days. And there's such a power imbalance that a freelancer is always very fearful to confront the company. They don't want to damage their reputation, and they're worried they won't get paid if they push too hard, and they won't work with that company in the future. So it's a power imbalance that unfortunately we've not yet been able to level up. And companies are the ones really that I think we want to help and support in this space to shift their attitudes so that it has this positive knock-on effect across all of the points we've touched on. And one of those key points is a freelancer needs to pay bills. Cash flow is incredibly important to a freelancer. If you've done a project for 3 months and you're not going to get paid for another 3 months, that can be really devastating. That can be the difference between being able to pay your bills, your rent, food, whatever. So I think the big picture stuff here is, how do we shift attitudes across the board to try and positively impact a lot of these points? And then the micro version of that is, can we start to have a better understanding and clear, more empathetic communication when both onboarding and working with agile talent, to be able to discover how they prefer to work? And equally, from a client's perspective, we can get into those preferences too, for, I think, a more frictionless and more amenable way to get things done.
To a point of like 3 months payment, sometimes companies think, whatever, it's just a few thousands, why should I care? But exactly, sometimes few thousands is the question of like being able to like deal with your daily expenses and not, and like, they just don't get it. And if you could design the perfect system for integrating freelancers, what would it look like?
Well, we want to try and get rid of as many of the barriers that currently exist as possible. So a lot of the red tape stuff is tricky, and that requires some new changes or use of technology or whatever that looks like. That's going to be a company by company basis. But how can we start to streamline that process of identifying the talent to begin with, whittling that down to a short list of individuals that you can start to have a conversation with? I think it's important to invest time into that conversational piece. Of all of the stages, I would say that one-on-one aspect, which is often rushed through. I mean, the whole interview process across the board is bonkers anyway, but certainly with freelancers, to give them that opportunity to have the conversations that we've been talking about today can really take care of a lot of the hassle that might come further down the road. It really looks after so many of those potential pitfalls in the future. And then onboarding, the actual process, like I said, will be very much on a personalized basis, but really to try and smooth out as many of those as you can, to avoid, even from a freelancer's perspective, having to invest a huge amount of time in any sort of onboarding process, any chasing of invoices, involving legal components. All of that is time that the freelancer isn't getting paid. So how do we smooth out all of those steps and key elements to be able to, what we're essentially doing is pretty simple, right? We're trying to match make two people together who are suitable for a project, to be able to work in harmony for both parties to get a fair value out of that transaction, and then continue to work or move away and move on. It's something I think we've overcomplicated with a combination of the culture and attitudes around freelancing, and then some of the logistical and administrative barriers that we've put up. Some we can't help, we have to deal with, but others I think we've built ourselves internally. And so looking at ways to either put in some new doors to walk through or knock them down completely.
I feel like hiring a freelancer is very similar to hiring a full-time person, but so much faster and so much more effective. And that's exactly the main blocker, because the companies got used to have this like long, very, very slow process of hiring. and they just don't want to do other work. They just want why should we spend not even spend, why should we be faster if we have all these processes, if we know that this takes 1 month and I will get paid for this 1 month, this will take 2 months and I as a full-time person will get paid for these 2 months. Why would I do it in 1 week if I can do it in 2 weeks, in 2 months? I feel like it's also some kind of like maybe internal blocker. But once again, to your point, it's all about creating this processes. If they just want to work faster and work better, if companies want to get their business results, like better business results. And you've also pointed beforehand that companies have like sort of like blended workforce. Yes, like we talking about AI and also independent talents. So I truly believe that it's unavoidable to deal with AI. Still, many companies avoid to deal with freelancers. So if we take two companies, one who is using freelancers and one who is not, what is the difference? What is this company who is not using this independent talents? What are they risking?
Well, again, it's company specific, but I think there are so many use cases for freelancers that offer a huge amount of advantage. Right? If you think about certain positions in your organization, just quite simply don't require full-time support. You may not have the workload or to hire somebody, and you're going to end up bringing somebody in who is working at 30-40% capacity. So in those instances, you would look to agile talent, you would look to freelancers to try and bring in some skill gaps. But more than that, you are bringing in a senior individual who you could potentially not afford or not want to pay for on a full-time capacity. And that level of expertise to fulfill a project, to bring insights, to offer advice, this can completely transform a company. It's like being able to hire the top mind in your industry for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And their legacy, once they finish that project, lives on throughout that company. And that learning and that capacity is transformative. So a company that's utilizing freelance talent is often highly flexible. I'm very loath at predicting anything. And in 2025, I'm particularly loath to do that because the world is so unpredictable at the moment. But I think
Yeah.
one thing we can be sure of is that it is unpredictable. And because of that, I think as organizations, we're going to have to become incredibly good at adapting and pivoting, depending on the environment and the landscape. And freelancers are perfect for that kind of movement. You can bring individuals in to help you create new avenues, new directions, and then not have to feel like you're anchored to something, knowing that there might be another turn in the road pretty shortly. And that's certainly something I've been observing over the past number of years. We think about in the UK, we've had Brexit, globally, we've had the pandemic, and globally, we've had AI. There are three things that have completely shifted the way organizations and companies have been able to trade and move forward in a very short space of time. And freelancers fit that model of quick adaptation and ability to shift gears perfectly. So I think a company that is not only utilizing freelancers, but has also culturally fully bought into the idea of agile talent has a huge advantage over a company that doesn't in that capacity.
I feel like it's time to become anti-fragile, and that's exactly what freelancers can bring you. And Matt, I wish to have the sky is the limit, but time is the limit. So the final question, what advice would you give to company just starting to use freelancers?
Well, I think there's a few things to consider. If you're starting to look at the hiring process, make sure that you give a little bit of time to both laying out what your mission is, maybe the broader project, and giving more context to the freelancers so they can understand better not only the project, but how it's going to be used and how they may be useful. Speak to the freelancer. So if you're going to use a platform that's very faceless and transactional, try and make time to have a conversation with the freelancer. If it's a short and very binary project, fair enough. But anything more than that, jump on a quick call and have conversations around working styles, around the broader concept of the project. Because guess what? The freelancer probably can solve more than one problem for you, and you will almost definitely be able to utilize them for so many more aspects of what you're trying to achieve, which will save you a huge amount of time. And then treat a freelancer in the way you would treat an employee, or really the way you would treat another human. You know, show empathy, show kindness, include them in certain aspects of the company, because you're going to get the best out of that individual. And we always say this to new freelancers. It's all about trust. You know, the whole idea of building your brand, developing marketing strategies, connecting with individuals, it's about trust. Are you going to show up and do the job? Is a company going to think you're going to work well with my team and you're going to add value? And the job of a freelancer is to communicate. So for a company hiring freelancers, I think building up that element of trust, which happens over conversations and project by project moments, you're going to end up with a fantastic relationship whereby projects will get done. You'll feel good about yourself. You'll be able to open up new doors and avenues. And I think you'll save yourself an absolute fortune.
And I feel like the best time to start working with freelancers was yesterday, and the best next time is today. So just go and do it. Last but not least, name 2 people I should reach out to talk about the independent workforce.
Oh, well, I've had a look at your podcast. You've spoken to a lot of folks that that I think would be great. Aaron Peters is someone who I think is a wonderful individual, first and foremost, but also a fantastic expert in the future of work, and someone who I think would bring a huge amount of value. And then Una, the CEO of Indie List in Ireland, is doing incredible things and has really strong thoughts and opinions about freelancers and the entire freelance landscape, not just in Ireland, but globally. So I think there are 2 powerhouses that you might like to have a chat with.
And what is the best way to connect with you?
Well, Freelancer Club is fairly well established. Stick it into Google and you'll be able to find what we do. And if you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll also see some of the work we're doing around education and advocacy there too.
No, Matt, I'm finally super happy that we met here in this setting. At least we had this one-on-one conversation, and I am happy to see not just your LinkedIn photo, but real you. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And thank you a lot for sharing your experiences and for doing what you are doing, for bringing these freelancers, for helping them to strive, to grow, for connecting the dots in the freelance market, and for growing it overall, especially working with government. I feel like it's the hardest part to deal with. It's even harder than to work with end clients, with companies. So thank you so much for what you are doing. And yeah, it's been a huge pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure's all mine, Yurii. Thanks a lot.
And yeah, see you in the freelance world. And for listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Independent Workforce. I hope you've taken one step closer to working smarter with freelance talent. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to learn even more and share it with your colleague. And remember, the future of work is now.